Good afternoon. I am going to go from the deep infrastructure protocol layer of the last 20 minutes to not only just the application layer, but something even more ethereal than that. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what artists are doing in this space, and then about how we're working at Codex to help people working and developing unique assets like art, and how blockchain can help those industries. Maybe my slides are waiting. Okay, so in the meantime, I'll give you a quick background. Here we go. Okay, so I'm the founder of Codex. I'm also the founder of Shios, which is a block producer on the EOS blockchain. You can follow me, Jesse Block, where I mainly tweet about art and blockchain and crypto. The reason I do that is because in 2016 I wrote a master's thesis on the applications of blockchain for the art world. Spent about a year researching what was at the time about 20 companies who were looking at how blockchain technology could impact the art world. Ranged from everything including payments with digital cryptocurrencies for artworks, artists who are using blockchain to create works and document their works, all the way through to auction houses and dealers who were recording these items on blockchain to develop a secure way of storing provenance information. And we'll get into that a little bit later. But I'm going to start with a little bit about what artists are thinking, because not only does it provide you a little bit of light relief from what otherwise is a sort of very technical day, but also I think it's important to recognize that this technology is sort of broadening its reach, and people who are otherwise not sort of so interested in the technical side are really beginning to think about the impact that blockchain is having on society. And this is an artist, Bentham Bainbridge, who talks about this idea of art as a scarce asset and digital money as a scarce asset as being able to mutually reinforce one another. And I think some of the work that artists are doing about blockchain at the moment is certainly having an impact. So here are some light-hearted ones, just for a couple of moments. On the left-hand side is a board game, Risk, by the artist Simon Denny, that was exhibited at the Petzl Gallery in New York. It was a series of games and sort of based on things like Pokemon and Risk, all about the players in the blockchain system at the time. So this was 2016, and this game is all about Vitalik. On the left-hand side, you have a work by Crypto Graffiti, who's one of my favorite artists in the space. Obviously, this is the pseudonymous Satoshi Nakamoto, but what's particularly clever about it is that it's actually made up of cut-up JP Morgan Chase credit cards. Bitcoin was a work by the New York-based artist Sarah Miohas. She actually issued her own coin. It was a sidechain of Bitcoin back in 2015, and with Bitcoin you could redeem your Bitcoins for a physical work of Sarah's. So I know a number of collectors who have now accumulated enough digital Bitcoins to purchase one of Sarah's physical works, but there are also a sort of a trading market, a secondary market for Bitcoin. Kind of quite clever, I think. Obviously the name slightly alluding to the male dominance of blockchain, not only then, but that still persists today. And something that caught the eye very much of the traditional art world as well. And these are another couple of pieces. Obviously, HODL, something that, given the last couple of weeks' performance, is a true calling for people out there for the cryptocurrency market. And Terry Cook, who is a British artist based in Edinburgh, who has become a real favorite of many of the founders and people working in this space. She paints quite beautiful traditional paintings and watercolors that are very applicable to cryptocurrency. This is a book that was written by a group here in London called Artists Rethinking the Blockchain. It steps slightly away from the light-hearted and humoured works that I spoke about before, and it's a really amazing collection of essays, artworks, and sort of critical thinking about the impact that blockchain can have, not only on artists and on creative industries, but on the world more generally. And I highly recommend it for anybody who is remotely interested in thinking about the bigger picture, about what this technology really can do for society and for people today. And the last piece that I'll show you right now is a piece by Kevin Abosch, who comes from the traditional art world, is most well known for selling a photograph of a potato at Sotheby's for over €1 million, and also for his portraits of Silicon Valley entrepreneurs and Hollywood celebrities on a black background. And Kevin did this rather cool piece earlier this year where he had his wife, who is a doctor, take his blood. He then created a smart contract on Ethereum, issued 1,000 ERC20 coins called I am a coin, and he stamped that contract address in his own blood. The idea was that he was creating a permanent link between himself and the coins that he was issuing, and those have then become the subject of numerous other works, including a piece that we auctioned earlier this year to raise money for charity, where he had printed a public and a private key of an Ethereum wallet, included his IMO coins, or some of them anyway, and watched as people stole them, and has now traced the movement of those coins through different Ethereum wallets. And he calls it crime scene investigation, the idea that he had been kidnapped. So all of this is very ethereal, but actually artists are really thinking about this for a real reason. And that's because artists face a real challenge in terms of proving their work, proving their intellectual property, and proving the originality, and trying to prevent fakes and forgeries in their market. This isn't a problem for the Mona Lisa, but we call it the Mona Lisa problem. We all know which one the real thing is. It's fairly obvious. Many of you might have seen it, and somebody giving me another picture of the Mona Lisa certainly would have a hard time to convince me that it's real. But in the digital art world, that isn't the case. And traditionally, a digital art piece might have been in the form of a JPEG or some other digital file. It's very easily copied and pasted. And so the market for digital art in terms of its monetary value has traditionally been very, very low. And that's because of this problem, because of the inability to prove that something is the real, the unique, the scarce object. And so many artists have embraced blockchain as a way of solving that problem, of being able to prove that there is something unique and digital, and yet being able to have copies of it and images of it represented elsewhere, which helps drive value back to the original item. CryptoKitties is a great example of this, although kind of bordering on the game and art world, very much is this idea of being able to create digital scarcity for something collectible, something that back in my day might have been a Beanie Baby or some other sort of physical work, but the idea of a digital object having true scarcity that people are willing to pay for was certainly something brought to the forefront by the CryptoKitties team. And actually there was a survey a while ago that looked at 16-year-old girls who would rather actually receive a digital token of a rose than they would receive a real rose from their boyfriend. And so there are a lot of art platforms right now dedicated to artists, helping them to create this scarcity for their digital work. Ascribe, most well known, having come from the big chain DB team, and several others, including Dada, who are one of my favorites, because they focus on this problem about artists' resale royalties. In music artists are used to receiving their royalties, although we know that that's problematic too, but in art it's particularly problematic. And in the EU, where artists are entitled to receive a royalty on the artworks that they create, they very rarely do. And that's because it's hard to prove when these things transact. Most of the transactions take place in a private market. And so the Dada platform and several others are focused on driving those resale royalties back to the creator. The reason that they do that, and the reason that it's important for artists, is because the value of artworks very much depends on the continued career of that artist. If I was to sell you a work as an art student for $100 and then go and become an accountant, the likelihood of that work ever achieving sort of fame and value is very low. And so there's very much this feeling that artists should be rewarded for their continued career path as a way of providing value to the people who buy their works. And Dada is very focused on that. So outside of what artists are doing, the art world is really embracing crypto too. In 2015, we saw the first crypto payment by an institution for a work of art. The Museum of Applied Contemporary Art in Vienna bought Harm van der Dorpel's Event Listeners, which is a digital piece, for Bitcoin. And we've seen since then galleries, artists, and even auction houses embrace the use of crypto as a payment mechanism. The reason for that is very often that transactions within the art world are cross-border. They take place over several jurisdictions in different currencies and can be quite complex, and so no need to tell this room how crypto can help solve some of those problems. And the idea of blockchain technology outside of crypto payments has also taken off. This was a survey done in 2016 of auction houses and galleries and intermediaries who were all already beginning to engage with the idea of blockchain technology as being a value add to their business in various ways. One of the most frequently talked about at the moment is fractional ownership. The idea that you can take an individual work of art, or any other asset for that matter, and split it into numerous shares. It's not something that's new to the art world. Traditionally, dealers and groups of collectors have often grouped together to purchase a work. But the difference here is that we can create liquidity and have tradable systems that can effectively allow shares of an asset, of a physical asset like an artwork, behave like a stock or a share. Maecenas is probably the most well-known company operating in this space who are going down this route of fractionalization. And they recently announced that they are going to fractionalize and auction a Picasso in January. And this summer they auctioned 31% of an Andy Warhol that was in total valued at about $5.7 million. And pieces of it are now owned by just over 100 collectors worldwide. And so I talked earlier a little bit about this application of provenance, and this is where my work is focusing on. Provenance is the history of the item. Many of us, when we think about our car, have a long record and a logbook of where we've bought that car. Or if we buy a house, we have a land registry where we have recorded our ownership of that property. But for these assets, for art, for diamonds, fine wine, classic cars, in some parts of the world, there is no history, there is no documented authoritative record, and that makes it very difficult to buy and sell. In the art world we call it provenance, and this is an example to show you the importance of it. On the left-hand side is what's widely believed to be a Jackson Pollock. It was found in a garage sale, but many people believe it to be authentic. They've tested the paint samples and they matched the paint samples of other Jackson Pollocks. They have, experts have looked at this and pored over it for hundreds, if not thousands of hours, and yet it won't sell. Versus the one on the right, which has many of the same paint samples in it, but is well known to be a Jackson Pollock because we know the 4 or 5 collectors who have owned it during the course of its lifetime. It's been very well documented, exhibited at well-known exhibitions, and it sold in 2016 for $140 million. So this is the quantum that we are talking when we have provable provenance, something that's really helpful, that can help us record and store that history of the item versus something that we don't have that record for. And so with Codex, what we are trying to do is working with institutions to create blockchain-based records for those assets. The idea being that once something is recorded onto the blockchain, subsequent appraisals, documentation, exhibition records can be added to that non-fungible token. Effectively, can be thought of like a passport or an identity for that asset. And on top of that, that can allow us to build and work with other applications. So once you have that unique identity, that blockchain-based record with Codex, you can now access third-party appraisals who can write directly to that blockchain record. You can receive an instant quotation for an asset-backed loan or for shipping for that asset. And you can take it into applications like Maecenas and share and create fractional shares of that work. Receive quotations from insurers and allow insurers to write insurance certificates directly to that record. Effectively building up this portfolio of valuable information. And it's valuable because you can verify who it came from. So validators within the Codex ecosystem are approved. They have a named sort of identity on that record. And so really replicating the reputation systems that we see in the offline world onto the blockchain. And on top of that, we've developed this collections management tool for people who are creating Codex records and using Codex to document their assets, as well as a whole kind of host of applications who are now building on top of Codex as well. So that was a little bit of a run through for what we're doing, but I think what's really important for me personally is not only these applications that can be taken from the world of fine art into other assets, other unique, valuable collectibles like diamonds and fine wine, but also the impact that it can have on our creative industries as well. Thank you.